and I'm sure that there will be rich discussions around how we can work and support to grow the profession more broadly in Ghana and across Africa. So I wish you all the best for the conference. We are delighted to be able to support in the small way that we can, and wish you all the best for great discussions and rich discussions during the day ahead. Thank you all, and I hope to see you all again soon.
Right. Thank you very much. Okay. So, if I'm right, we've had the message from Toby. Do we go according to the program? Okay. Now, I'm going to miss out on one particular slot here, and I'm going straight away to generative AI for insurance. I can only presume that AI stands for artificial intelligence. And these days, everybody knows what AI is all about. I'm now going to invite Otopa Kojo Bochwe, who is based in Switzerland, and so we are doing it online for him to give us this talk. So let's welcome him, please.
Yes, okay, but only I mean I can't hear you. Are you seeing my screen? I see my screen now. Someone should give me a heads up when it sees my screen. There it is. Okay. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody hears me. The main topic here, which is a bit of a, we call it a very, very interesting topic at the moment, a very hot topic, which is mainly generative AI. And I'll just touch a little bit on the actuarial science where we can apply this technology. So today's outline will be, I'll introduce a little bit of generative AI, and then generative AI in the actuarial field. There are a few, I'll not call it full-blown case studies, but I'll give you some tips on how some of these case studies are being developed, and from my own experience, some tools and techniques. And very much important, one of the most important is this ethical considerations and some challenges that are being faced, and some of these future trends and opportunities. Just to let you know why we are here, basically, one of them is maybe some people to also learn, and the other aspect is also letting you know that generative AI, as you see, it's been projected to grow from about 1.1 billion to almost 4.1 billion in 2028. the compound annual growth will be around 40%. And so it's something that at least we all should be interested in. I started, especially some of you know Chat GPT. Almost within 1 month or two, there were about 2 million subscribers. These are some of the figures which are also very interesting. Within the insurance industry, we have about 64% of adoption rates in the marketing, almost 60% in customer service, 60 again in finance, and also about 35% in R&D. Generative AI is showing a very, but it's becoming very versatile across different insurance functions. Quite recently, I was at a conference, and you can see that the insurance industry is much more ready now than when digitalization itself started. So it's an industry which is really, people are really getting much more interested in. Now let's just talk a little bit about generative AI. Has been in the world for a long time. I mean, we all know that. I mean, those who know Siri, which came almost more than 10 years ago, we are all aware of the fact that these are areas which are also linked to AI. But just recently, within 2 years, there's the aspect of generative AI, which people are much more interested when ChatGPT came into play. One thing is that we all have to be know that we had GTP1, we had GTP2, we had GTP3, then GTP4, which we have now, and then there's also this preview. All this time there was generative AI, but the one that really, changed the market was the GTP3, that was 3.6, which came about a year ago. And this is such that it is, an area where new things are being generated, meaning that you have your input data, but
Can you please just bear with us for a moment? Please, I beg you.
And that really helped the actuaries to know that we can also not only give our inputs, only pricing or reserving, but also we can collaborate with, data scientists, we can collaborate with other departments to be able to come up with very, very, good tools using generative AI. And that is what, and also not only even collaborating among with other departments, but also across regions, because I had that opportunity to also work with different people in different countries to come up with a lot of tools. Gen AI, we can use it for actuaries, can use it to improve some of our predictive models. One thing which is very important is, which I'll continue to reiterate, is synthetic data. Sometimes we have, which has been around for some time, but sometimes you have data, but first it's not enough, or secondly, due to some legal or regulatory issues, you'll not be able to use this data. So you have to look at the pattern and then generate synthetic data. Some time ago, you could use some probability distributions to do that, and we also did not have the computer power. But now, what is very, very good is that within some few minutes or seconds, you could generate this synthetic data with generative AI, which could assist you in predicting predictive modeling. One other aspect is also where we have to also know is that generative AI can help us with risk assessment. I was part of assessing a particular tool which could take risks from different reports using generative AI, and then be able to develop a certain risk map where maybe you don't have it will give you also the risk from other areas where you may not be looking at, and this will be done within some short period, which makes it very, very interesting when we assess risks using also generative AI. One area where we all are aware of is automating routine actuarial tasks. Now, maybe a lot of people may know already, with something like coding, it's not an issue, too much of an issue now, because you can have a full-blown code asking generative AI to assist you to debug. And even now, I don't know, some of you who have the paid version of ChatGPT, they are testing some other models within the ChatGPT, which one of them is called the Canvas, where you can run through put in your code, run through the code, and it will start. If you have some more, instead of doing it in 2 steps with ChatGPT with the normal, I'll say the normal ChatGPT, this one can at least be correcting your code. It's like an editor editing your code within. So if you're somebody who knows coding, you can also use that to be editing your code within the model, rather ChatGPT with Canvas. I think I've mentioned some of these case studies already. One of them is this predictive model, but just to make you know that where you can use it, we are more of claims, and also I'm from the reserving. I started my career as a reserving actuary. So this is an area where I'm very, very much passionate about. One thing is when ChatGPT came, when they started in 2018 something, but we have this version where when you want to project the estimates of travels, it was giving you some weird numbers. But I can tell you that the one that the whole one which is in preview for those who were paid that has really improved. So I'm not saying we should use ChatGPT to go and project triangles, but at least there is a lot of improvement going on. And one thing is very clear: we should. I always advocate that we should be interested in this particular development. It's very interesting times because initially you say, oh, I mean, it's not giving me any, but as time goes on, these models are really improving. Also with fraud detection, I think it's also been very, 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 instrumental there. That I will not. And we have also with customer behavior. Still, we can use the synthetic data. We have to. It's very because previously we were finding it very difficult to generate this. We could generate them. Those who are powerful computers could generate, but now it's something that if you have the patterns and you have your previous data, you could also use it to it could assist you to generate some of these data to be able to use for analysis like customer behavior analysis, which was not previously so obvious to get some of these data, and also because of maybe regulatory issues with all these data protection, you have to be careful that you don't go and use somebody's data within your analysis unless you have the go ahead from the person. There are some popular AI frameworks or techniques frameworks or libraries which one can use. One of them is mainly TensorFlow, but and also we have also PyTorch, Keras, and Sienna. I think most those who are concerned with some programming will know some of these. I don't want to go too deep into this because not everybody cares about these things. They only want to have their model working. Yeah. This part is where it's very, very important. It's the ethical consideration and challenges. One of them is about bias. Depending on the data that you use in training these models, there could be some bias. And one has to be very, very careful. It can have some kind of negative, impacts on some group of people. So one thing is you have to make sure that this thing is not reflected in your data, and so that there's also some form of fairness in these, models. This is something that for those who want to develop their own AI models, these are some of the things that one has to be very careful to check that it doesn't have any discrimination or any bias. Another aspect is data privacy. I don't know whether you are aware of Microsoft Copilot. When I went for a presentation, and for about 10-15 minutes, they presented this about privacy and also security. I think they did that for a very good reason. It was very, very important that we also have a look at that. When we are using data, make sure that you don't just, some people can upload something. There was a situation where you upload certain things into ChatGPT, and then it uses it to train. Depending on which version you are using, sometimes it tells you that you switch off, that it will not train on your data, but you have to still make sure that all these things are taken care of, especially the security and also you don't put in any sensitive data which you think may cause any issues. The other aspect is also regulatory, compliance. We have to make sure that we comply. There's come February, there will be the EU AI law, which is EU Act, which is coming into full force, and some of these things, I think, companies are already, making sure that they comply with some of these these acts. So we can look at some of these future trends. We have to be ready. What I think personally, I think that this is something we have to make sure we get involved in the development. I mean, we have to follow it closely because there are a lot of opportunities there, and we have to take advantage of these opportunities. For those who are in something, I mean, not only consultancy, you are whether you can also have your own, develop your own tools, your own AI tools, where you can share it with, or maybe I'll say not sell, but these are things that there's the potential that you can personalize some of these plural services. One very important is also, I always say that if you are an actuary and you check information online, or you check it from ChatGPT and it's in another field, be very careful that you don't think that you are a master of that field. Make sure that you let the experts look at it. So as an actuary, whichever field you are, whichever area you are in, you make sure that you check, you know whatever you get in there, you make sure you check. Definitely this human aspect of it, you don't just have to, swallow everything that it tells you. You have to make sure you do your own checks. So this is where we, as human, we also have to see how we can collaborate with AI and not just swallow everything that AI tells us, especially the journey. This is also becoming very important. AI agents, which will be performing tasks. On behalf of as on behalf of human, but I see it coming a lot. Now it's a lot in the news. Just like last week, Microsoft released something on that that you can also build your own AI agents within your tools. So this is an area where we have to also get involved because it's going to be it's something that is coming up quite frequently in the news now. So now we have to just see how we put everything together. Then after that, I'll give you some key takeaways. We have talked about Gen AI. We have ChatGPT. We have all the other models. One thing is that how do we integrate it into our workflow? And this is where we are heading towards. Some companies have already done something about that, but this is where we have to see how we implement some of these things into our workflows. As actuaries, we can also assist the market to do that in a way. I've been part of some few projects where we have been able to present courses with regards to Microsoft Copilot, which is in some companies they are testing it rigorously at the moment. I was part of the testers in my own company. So this is something we should also get ourselves obviously involved because it's going to be definitely is going to take over the other office tools, and we have to be able to know how to use them before it comes into the market. Also, we have to be aware of the risks. Some of them are already mentioned. What are the main or the key takeaways? Generative AI's impact on actuarial field is reshaping traditional actuarial practices, and also definitely is going to create new opportunities for us. is already creating, but we have to also go for these opportunities because I know some people are not interested because they've not maybe gone deep into it, but I think it's something we have to definitely be interested. It will assist us in some of our works to make us more efficient. It's already been shown by one of the again mentioning Microsoft because that's some of the tools I tested because some of the Office 365 specific Office 365 tools which has come up to be to make people more efficient. We have to also be very careful with the ethical part of it, as I mentioned, especially the biases and also the fairness. The future of actuaries, we should try as much as possible to be somehow at the forefront of this industry because we have the skills, and also we are built in such a way that we have a very broad view of things. I will say thank you, but one thing that I want to also say is that let's also say saying that I will leave with you is all models are not wrong. And these are some of the references that you can follow on, which when I started, I quoted some of these figures based on these references. I don't know how it's structured, but if you have any questions, you can ask if I can hear you.
Your hands and then we'll pick you up. Anybody with a question? Then we'll dismiss this session.
Okay.
I don't think we have any question.
No questions? Or should I start pointing at individuals to ask? I'm very capable of doing so. I'm very, very capable of pointing at
any questions,
individuals.
because I can't hear anybody speaking.
Any questions? Oh. Okay, I'll be liberal today. I'm in a very good mood. Because in my absence, somebody gave me pineapple drink. But if I'd been in a very foul mood, I would have just pointed to one or two individuals. But come to think about it, maybe I should. I've seen quite a few actuaries here. I'll leave you. God bless you. Mr. Bochi, thank you very much. Okay. So, if there are no questions as has happened, then I'm going to call upon Mr. Michael Chicharava, who is a member of the ASSA, and he's going to talk about professionalism above gains. One thing about professionalism is that in every profession, they prefer people to be professional. I'm sorry to say, as a continent, sometimes we compromise our integrity for other things. But that's why Michael is here. I met him last year. He's a phenomenal speaker. So let's please welcome him with a massive round of applause. Michael? Are the slides ready? His presentation is going to be done with the slides, so
All right. Good afternoon. In the interest of time, I've been allocated about 45 minutes to speak. Perhaps we'll try and do it in 40 minutes because it's about 12 past 12. I've got a meeting at 1 o'clock. So that's an incentive for me to finish. We were supposed to have slides up here, but we will speak and hopefully the slides will be put up. So we will speak. On my side, I've got slides, but it's not connected to this. So I was asked to speak on professionalism beyond gains. The word professionalism, I think we already understand it, and I think we have spoken about professionalism a lot of times. Even in the morning, speakers spoke about professionalism. Even the theme of this event has got the word professionalism in it. But there is an extension to it that I was given as a brief to talk about, which is above gains. My slides use the word beyond gains, okay? So professionalism above gains, professionalism beyond gains. That's what I'm going to speak about. I had no idea when I was told to speak about this. I just said, I know professionalism. That's all I know. But the above gains or beyond gains, that's none of my business. I don't know that, right? But I couldn't escape it. So I'm here to speak about that. But before we move into talking about professionalism above gains or beyond gains, let's just talk about the expectation of an actuary. When we talk of professionalism, what is expected of actuaries? I've put up a list of the issues that actuarial professionals are expected to do. They're expected to understand the meaning of being a professional. So that's point number one. You're expected to be able to identify unprofessional conduct and know how to deal with it. So that's point number two. Then you're expected to apply the principle of ethical decision making. That's point number three. You're expected to know how to deal with conflict of interest when you see it. Then you are also expected to describe the obligations and responsibilities of a professional. That's point number 5. Point number 6, you are expected to understand the standards expected of members of the profession by various stakeholders, because stakeholders expect you to understand certain standards. Then number 7, we are expected to identify situations where other expertise is required. So you often need accountants, lawyers, and other experts. You're supposed to understand that you need other expertise and bring it to the table. Then you need to appreciate the importance of continuous professional development so that you remain relevant. And then you also need to reflect on the future of the actuarial profession itself and your role in it. So those are my 9 points that I've put down here that are expected of an actuarial professional. Now, with those points, I now want to move. Okay, so those are not the slides. I think you need to put slides, not Word document or PDF. All right, so, but I will talk about that at some point. So professionalism beyond gains. Now let's define it. The word beyond gains or the word above gains is what caught my eye. And it's quite an important one. So what does it actually mean? So the key principle of this, of professionalism beyond gains, is that it speaks of how actuaries can uphold professionalism, ethics, and integrity whilst balancing business goals and profitability. So that's one definition. And this would cover a number of themes. I'm going to go through some of these themes. I've got 6 of them. The first one is the definition. Yeah, this is the slide. So please go to slide number, just move forward. So this is what I spoke about when I started. The expectations. Yeah, we are on this slide. So I've spoken about the CRIP principle. Now let's speak about some of the themes under this principle. Firstly, you need to understand the definition and importance of professionalism. And in this case, we are guided by actuarial standards and codes of conduct that you need to understand and apply in your day-to-day work. Then you need to recognize the public interest, because the issue of public interest, every actuary really works in the public interest. So wherever you are, let's say you're in an insurance company, your aim is to make sure that the insurance company is operating properly, well resourced, the solvency levels are at the right level, premiums are not too high or too low, but in the public interest. Why are you doing that? Because of the public that buy the insurance products. They need to ensure sustainability of that company. So we almost always acting in the public. The public and the other stakeholders being the public being referred to. Then you need to be able to balance commercial pressures and ethical ethical responsibility. So often there is conflict of interest, and conflict of interest is quite tricky or difficult. Most actuaries work in companies where you do not run the company, you are not the boss. There is a CEO, there are other people, and they may put pressure on you to do certain things that may give short-term financial gains, but in the long term may actually be harmful for a particular company. So you need to be able to deal with those things as an actuary. And I'm just giving one example, right? And then transparency and communication. I think this is a point we've always emphasized, that you have to, in your communication, you have to be transparent. You need to be open and speak honestly as an actuary to make sure everything is clear. If we move to the next point, which is long-term thinking versus short-term thinking. This implies that actuaries, when practicing professionalism beyond gains, they need to apply sustainable practices, which means you should not only focus on long-term outcomes or long-term issues that happen tomorrow or this year, but also think about the implications over the very long term. So you can't start chasing profit targets for only 2024 when that has got implications for sustainability or viability of the business into the future, as an example. And then in terms of risk management, we are risk managers. We are always managing risk. So there is need to apply some bit of prudence. So on this slide that we have just finished, we addressed the definition and importance of professionalism, and then how, if we are to display professionalism beyond gains, how we can balance commercial pressures and ethical responsibility and long-term thinking versus short-term gains. So if we move to the next slide, which I think the guys can move to the next slide. The next slide speaks of regulatory compliance and governance. You need to comply with the regulations or regulatory frameworks like IFRS 17 Solvency II. But why? You're not complying for the purposes of, tick the box exercise to say, I have to comply, otherwise I'll be penalized. You are complying because it is the right thing to do. So when we speak of professionalism beyond gains, you are actually doing it because it is the right thing to do, not because you're afraid of the regulator or you're afraid of penalties. If we speak of corporate governance, you need to go beyond, over and above, in order to advise executives, company executives, and boards of directors on applying on the application of international best practice in corporate governance. You know, you can't just watch things happening and you actually don't raise those issues or the implications. That is professionalism beyond gains, where you are prepared to have your head cut off for actually calling out or saying something, right? You don't even think twice about it. Then the point on social responsibility and the broader impact is an interesting one. For example, the issue of climate change and environmental risk. We know that a lot of companies are incorporating climate change into regulations right now, and some actuaries are involved in modeling climate change. I'm from Southern and Central Africa, and over the last 1.5 years, we have got El Nino-induced droughts, no rain, so food and all those things. And actuaries can actually play a role in modeling those things and the impact of climate change, which is over and above what we used to do as actuaries. Then inclusivity and diversity. I heard someone talking about, okay, this was said in the morning. I said, now they are stealing my talk. The only thing is that you had not seen my slides. It was you, madam, or doctor. So you had not seen my slides. So this story of inclusivity and diversity, actuaries tend to want to develop complicated products for the wealthy. They forget the underprivileged, the underserved markets. You don't even think about it. You think there is no money, the margins are too small. Yet that's actually what we need to be developing if we are to bridge the gap. We know that insurance penetration on the African continent is very small. In most countries, 2%, 3%, not more than 5%. It's because we're probably not developing those products. We have not understood that particular market, the underserved market, the people who actually need to be protected the most. We are not developing the products. We are not leading as actuaries to actually put the products out there, which means there is no inclusivity. You're not going to have a more diversified economy. You're always going to have poverty, all these other things that are happening. You have a social responsibility. If we are to talk about professionalism above gains, professionalism beyond gains, you've got that responsibility to take the lead and develop these things. Then leadership and professional development. I saw people here standing here with their judge and accepting the roles that they are going to play. Now, that's quite important. They are taking a leadership role to make sure that the Ghana actuarial community actually develops, to make sure that the actuarial profession in Ghana develops. President Neil is leaving now, but he has been leading. So leadership and professional development, which includes mentoring people, knowledge sharing, and just leading and developing the profession is quite important. You're not paid for it. You're a volunteer. So that's professionalism beyond gains. We need to be doing this. Senior actuaries need to come on the table and try and help the youngsters, right? Then there was just a presentation on AI, generative AI right now. There are a lot of issues that come with AI. And as actuaries, we have to adopt that. But you need somebody to take the lead, like that presenter is taking the lead to tell us we can use this, but it has got its own issues. We have to understand those issues. We need to move forward. So these are the 6 themes of professionalism beyond gains that I thought I would share with you. The next slide is just going to really just summarize this. Professionalism beyond gains, therefore, refers to the principle that true professionalism transcends the pursuit of financial or material benefits. focusing instead on deeper values such as ethics, integrity, and the broader impact of one's work on society. This implies that professionalism is not merely about achieving measurable success, but about doing what is right, responsible, and sustainable, even when it may not lead to immediate or personal benefit. Professionalism, that's one word. Beyond gains, above gains. Please remember this, because I'm going to be preaching this for the next decade. In fact, I've even written an article on it right now that will come out in a future magazine, because I was given this by Neil and Mark, and they said, you have to speak about this. Even if I didn't know, now I know about the topic. So it's quite important. Now, in terms of interpretation, there are a number of contexts, and I've already touched on some of them. So we're not going to spend too much time on this slide, because I want to move to some case studies. So, but there are some contexts. Professionalism beyond gains can be interpreted in a lot of different contexts. When you talk of long-term sustainability, professionalism beyond gains can apply there. When you talk of social responsibility that I've already presented, again, you can present professionalism beyond gains there. The issue of fostering trust and integrity is quite important, because, you know, when you have, in society where you serve, when you have created trust and you have been acting with integrity, it creates credibility, which is the status the actuarial profession actually has. And it is up to every actuarial professional individual member to uphold that, to make sure we maintain that, because it was created by those who came before us, and we just progressing that forward. Then leadership and mentorship, I've already mentioned that. You can read those slides on your own. Regulatory compliance, regulatory and legal compliance, I've already mentioned that earlier. Then ethical conduct over profit. I've already mentioned that, related to conflict of interest, avoiding pressures, also related to corporate governance and things like that. So if we move to the next slide, again, I want to surprise again and emphasize this. So professionalism beyond gains can therefore be interpreted in various ways. But at its core, it signifies a commitment to ethical principles, long-term thinking, and social responsibility that goes beyond the pursuit of immediate or material success. I've said it again, I'm repeating it because it is an important principle. It highlights that true professionalism is about making a positive impact, maintaining trust, and contributing to a broader purpose, even when it does not benefit yourself directly. So that's the summary. Now I want to come to case studies, because I want us to illustrate this professionalism beyond gains. Case studies are more interesting. So we have got about, the good thing is we have got time. The good thing is we have got time. And we can discuss this, you can raise questions. So the first question is a success story. And it is called SA Taxi. SA Taxi. So SA Taxi is a well-known company in South Africa. It is owned by a company called Transactional Capital that is listed on the Johannesburg Exchange. So what does SA Taxi do? SA Taxi is a developmental finance institution. What it does is it provides financing to drivers and owners of minibus taxis that carry people from their locations where they live going to work. So we have got a lot of taxis on the road. Most of them are financed by SA Taxi. Well, it has had problems in the past year or two, but I suppose every company goes through cycles. But here we are talking of more than a decade of success, probably 15 years of success. And now at this company, there was an actuary. At this company, there was an actuary who was the chief risk officer. And he joined this company because he said, I want to contribute. What does it mean for South Africa? And I'm just using that as a case study. These people who are now getting funding from SA Taxi could not get funding from mainstream banks. So they will go, and their credit profile was considered to be poor. Therefore, they would not get financing. Therefore, there were no taxis on the road. Therefore, jobs could not be created. Therefore, people could not be moved from one location to another to go to work. The list goes on and on and on. As a taxi comes, they say, no, we know these guys. We're going to come, we're going to implement telematics, We're going to fit some instrument into vehicles. We're going to sell these vehicles to these guys. We insure their vehicles. We will do a whole lot of things. So they actually did vertical integration where they created where you sell a taxi. If there's an accident, it will be panel beaten here. If it is a mechanical breakdown, you come to the workshop is here. Insurance company within the same company, they did that, right? So that company started operating and selling taxis. Huge success. Obviously, it has been challenged recently, so it has got its own cash flow problems. Now, we had an actuary in that company who was chief risk officer, illustrating professionalism beyond gains. He went into this company where it was bleak. You know, he just joined it in the middle, sometime in the 2000. Things were not very clear what was going to happen. And he developed the risk management policies and strategies for this company and put together models, whether it's credit risk modeling and all sorts of things that he did. Displaying that he wanted to change society. He saw what was happening. He saw that this company has got potential. This company started making lots of money, making billions of profits. But what it did, it created jobs for a lot of people who could never have gotten finance. It bridged the gap. It helped a lot of people become entrepreneurs by owning taxis they could never have owned had they gone to FNB, ABSA, and all the other banks. Up to now, they have not actually managed to break into that market. SA Taxi has remained in that market. So this is a story that's displaying professionalism beyond gains, where a company went ahead. At least it had not only one actuary, there was that one qualified actuary, but an actuarial team as well that was actually working and make sure there is no unfairness in the models developed, in the granting of credit and many other things that should be happening at that company. That was going beyond the call of duty, because a lot of actuaries would under normal circumstances, would not see the opportunity. They would not even see whether there is any value given the structure of society. So that's an example. Now, this actuary is now the principal examiner of the Actuarial Society of banking subject right now. So again, he has continued, you know. It's a job he has continued to do. I mean, he was always like that when we saw him, and we realized that, oh, this is a good resource, and he is now principal examiner, playing a leadership role, playing other roles to help develop the actuarial profession. So for me, SA Taxi is a success story. It's an example of a success story. Right. I will come for questions because I think this may require some bit of discussion. I want to go to the next story, which is not so a success story. Now, this is African Bank. Now, African Bank, as it is today, it is very profitable. It is actually expanding. It is probably going to list. It's another South African bank. This is 2024. How did it get there? Because it actually failed in 2014. So African Bank collapsed in 2014. It collapsed and it was bailed out by the Reserve Bank of South Africa and all the bigger banks in South Africa. It needed about 10 billion rands, which is about 500 million US dollars, if we use US dollars, which is about 500 million to actually become a better bank again. But what actually happened there is the story I have outlined here. There was actually a commission of inquiry that was established by the South African Reserve Bank to actually check what was happening at that bank. It had actuarial professionals, very junior. They were not decision makers. It didn't have fellows or associates, but they were very junior, working in roles where they had they couldn't make any decision. But what actually happened in the commission of inquiry? They found that the directors failed. The directors failed their fiduciary duties, and the business itself, it was a lending business, it was a bank, was conducted negligently and recklessly. The CEO's influence over the board and staff was too great. So the CEO was powerful and, I don't know, strong-willed. I don't know whether I should use this word, but he was too powerful, almost overpowering the board. Then the CEO often disagreed with the bank's CFO and the auditors, so they would disagree. The lending practices at the bank were imprudent and there was poor credit underwriting, essentially granting credits to people who may not have qualified. Then bad debts and impairments were not calculated correctly, and the gap between required impairments and reported impairments continued to increase from year to year. Some of you would know IFRS 9, International Financial Reporting Standard 9, which is about expected credit loss that came into play, I think, in 2018. A lot of actuaries are involved in that, actually. But in this case, at that time, it was not effective and they did not calculate impairments correctly at that time. Then they bought a furniture business that was struggling, and they lent money to that furniture business, and that furniture business went under together with the money. So firstly, they paid for the business, then they gave it more money by lending money into it, and that business went under together with the money. So it was double. They lost double by buying first a struggling company, lending money to a struggling company, and then the company failed. So that happened. And then the bank's funding model, how the bank was being funded, was considered unsustainable and purely based on wholesale funding and with no detailed deposit. And then the chief risk officer was unqualified and a drunkard. So they say a drunkard, you know. I don't know, that's what's in that report. They say a drunkard. He even arrived to the meeting with the commissioner drunk to prove the point. So that's actually what happened. Now, so we wondered, we were watching now at that time, the actuarial profession at that time was so much in banking. We were now looking at these things. We were saying, but were they actuaries? We were worried. And we realized, no, they were not, you know, the guys were youngsters. They didn't even know what was happening. When the bank was bailed out, the South African Reserve Bank came and requested the Actuarial Society of South Africa and said, we want an actuary to sit on this board, because they were now separating the bank into a bad book and a good book, and then they put money in the good book and they continued collecting from the bad book. There was also an insurance element. So they went to Peter Temple. Some of you would have heard of him or know him, who is a former president of the Actuarial Society of South Africa. In 2014, I think 15, somewhere there, 15, 16. So we recommended Peter Temple. Up to now, he still sits on the board. He chairs one of the committees, I think the Capital Actuarial and Risk Committee. He chairs that. He sits on the board. He's an actuary. The chairman of that board is actually someone with an actuarial background. He didn't go ahead to qualify, but the actuarial background, that's Thabo Diloti. And it is now employing actuaries, that bank. Even now, there are now a number of actuaries in that bank. So these actuaries are in this bank to try and make a difference, to avoid the story of, you know, short-term gains versus long-term sustainability and things like that. So this one, an example of where there was failure, but the actuarial professional was called and said, we don't believe you've got all the solutions, but we think you can be able to help. Can you come and try and sit and help things? So this was professionalism beyond gains, and it is professionalism beyond gains being done now there at that bank. It is now one of the best performing banks. It is buying other banks. It will probably list at some point in the next 18 months, but it was a total failure, and I've outlined why it failed and then what happened afterwards. So these are my two case studies, and I really wanted to this is 12:40, 12:39, to reach this stage and allow some bit of questions and conversation from the floor for the next 10 minutes. And then, because I've got enough time, I've managed my time, you guys can clap hands for me. I have managed my time. So thank you very much. Let's now have questions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's now have questions. Let's have discussion about these stories. First, the theory that I gave, the case studies I gave, and anything else you might want to ask on this topic. And maybe the mic must be moving around so that we have a bit of a discussion. I'll be disappointed if we don't get any questions. I'll never come back to Ghana again if we don't get any questions. So you better make sure I come back. 1, 2, 3.
Okay. My name is Oti. I want to find out what professional steps, the professional steps taken by the Chief Finance Officer and the auditors with respect to the disagreement with the CEO when things are not moving right.
Yeah, so your question is, I got the rest, but your question then is what? What is the question?
I want to know the professional steps, like the steps taken by the Chief Finance Officer and the auditors of the field bank with reference to the disagreement between themselves and the CEO.
So you're saying professional steps taken by the auditors?
Yes, and the Chief Finance Officer. When
And
there
the
was
Chief Financial Officer?
of the field
Look,
bank.
at that time, so we are talking of a story of 2014. These are boardroom squabbles. They never become public. Auditors might even qualify statements, or they may end up accepting. So it doesn't mean when the disagreements were there were not resolved, but they were probably resolved without actually going to the underlying issue. But generally what you do, if you're an auditor, you're just the same as an actuary. You might simply refuse to sign off financial statements because there was misstatement of financial statements. Some of the numbers did not make sense, and that's why it struggled. So you might refuse. So what actually happened in this case, I think the audit partner, was actually questioned. I don't know what happened to him, whether he was fired or whatever, but he was questioned because sometimes you find that the auditors actually connive with the executive. But professional steps is really to highlight what the issues are, make sure everybody understands, allow a bit of discussion and debate, and refuse to sign off until the issues are resolved. Provide the solutions. Because sometimes you provide the solutions, they are there. The issue then is there is refusal to implement what you have suggested. Now in that case, if there is refusal, you may sign off, but you qualify the whole thing. So if you're an actuary, if you sign off, you qualify and say, these issues have not been resolved, they need to be resolved. Even if a regulator reads that report, you can throw it back and say, no, it has got too many qualifications, I can't make use of this. Yeah? So professional steps, my brother, you speak to Neil, go to the most senior actuary or senior actuaries, speak to them, tell them your story, take them for a beer if they drink beer or buy Coke or whatever it is. Talk about the issues to see how you can move forward. You can never solve these things on your own. You have got to talk to others. Thank you. There are questions this side.
Yes, we've all seen that the importance of actuaries in this case, the bank. So what steps the Central Bank of South Africa have taken to include the actuaries, qualified actuaries in all the banks, not in this bank in particular? Has there been any regulatory changes or something to include the actuaries in the banks to prevent further deteriorating structure of some of these banks?
Okay, all right, thanks for your question. The topic is on professionalism beyond gains. Now you are asking me questions about banking. Anyway, you have asked the right person. So, on that, the issue of actuaries being in banks is something I am personally driving at a global level myself. We are saying we need to have what we call an actuarial function in banking. You can call it another name if you want, but it must have all these different professionals, actuaries and whoever diversified. So that's a story. I've written articles, I've written stories. But what the Reserve Bank, they have not done anything. There is no statutory role for actuaries in a bank. But the banks themselves have found themselves employing actuaries. So you go to all these banks, all the top 4 banks, they now have got actuarial professionals in different divisions, right? And I am actually one of the person who is very vocal about saying, let's actuaries find their way and at least, contribute to the risk management. But the Reserve Bank of South Africa, to answer you, has not forced anybody. We know in 2008 when Basel II was introduced, they told banks and said, you've got these models, they are too complicated for accountants, these models. You are better off getting actuaries involved. They did not prescribe, they did not say, if it's not looked by an actuary, we won't look at it. But they hinted that it may be difficult when we come to approval, when you at least haven't brought some actuaries to look at this. So that actually happened way before. Yeah. But banks are already employing anyway. It's happening anyway in different divisions, whatever it is. That's happening. There was another question. Was it this side? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My question, I have two questions. So the first one is, I'm
You're
curious.
only allowed one question.
Okay, so
The
I have
room
one
is
question.
Too full. Okay, it's fine. You can go ahead.
All right, so I'm curious, the furniture company that the bank bought, did they find out who the owners were? Because with this topic we are treating, I have the sense that potentially a key executive was a beneficial owner of that firm. And secondly, the second question, if I'm permitted, in our profession as actuaries, risk officers, and people who have key roles that have public interest, there are times the stakeholders at the very top, either the board or shareholders, might have some disagreements with your opinion. How best do you manage such situations, as it clearly shows that there were such disagreements between the CEO and the CFO and the auditors?
Okay, I want you to start your question, the first one. The second one is fine, I've understood that.
Okay, so
Yeah, the first one, what is the main question? The main
yes,
question?
so in the point 7, it says the bank bought
Oh, you mean the struggling furniture business?
Yes, so
yeah, what about it?
did the furniture business have a beneficial owner in the bank? Maybe did someone have interest in that furniture business? I don't know if there's any further information.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I get you. Actually, for that particular point, there was a prior relationship between the bank and the furniture business. Remember, furniture you buy on hire purchase, on finance. So the bank, there was a relationship already. The bank was already in a strategic alliance or relationship with the furniture business where they would finance buyers of furniture, individuals, you guys. When you go there and they say, yeah, take your furniture. You start paying 24 months, you know. So there was a relationship already. So I can't say it was really a case of there was conflict of interest or there was someone known, but these guys knew each other. When then they bought, I don't know how that transaction was done, but furniture businesses in South Africa in general were struggling at that time anyway. Right? Furniture businesses in general, the people were simply not buying. So it was, and this company was one of those that was struggling, and they went to buy it. So that's actually what happened. So I can't really conclude or say maybe there was conflict of interest, maybe they knew him. Maybe there was, but that is not what was found out. Okay, so that was question number 1. Question number 2 is a relationship issue. So you need to do soft skills, lots of soft skills, right? Because it's a relationship issue. It does not mean that as professionals you don't disagree, you don't challenge things. You always do. You always disagree. You're always not going to agree. But at the end of the day is the outcome of that, whether it has improved the situation, whether it has brought a solution that's sustainable on the table, you know. So CEO disagreeing with the auditor, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. But they were just overpowering, right? And disagreeing on things that are so out of principle, things that wouldn't be done. So I don't want to leave the impression that you should not disagree. In fact, a better society is built when someone scrutinizes things and says, but I disagree with you there. But do it with respect and bring some solutions onto the table. You were asking me, how do you resolve this? You're going to have to do it over many years of developing yourself, go to soft skills. We are often speaking about these things, saying you need to understand how to manage relationships. When Neil is unhappy, how do you go back and make sure Neil eventually becomes happy and they are moving forward again? You know? So this is a soft skill. It's not something I can really say much here. It's a soft skill. But still staying within your professional lane, professionalism beyond gains. I like the word beyond gains or above gains. Still staying in that lane, you must disagree. Respectfully and professionally, and saying why you disagree and provide some solutions that will make this thing better. If you don't disagree, I probably will even fire you if you're working with me or for me. You have to disagree with me because that's how solutions are actually born. But here we are talking of an extreme case here. Okay, thank you. Maybe one question, because Okay. I think I still have got time. 2-3 minutes. So there is a question there.
Yes, so I'm Henry. Given that with the case of the African Bank, given that the bank loan book was restructured into good loan book and then bad loan book, was it a case of a coincidence? That's why the bank was sustained, or what strategies did Peter Temple implement from an actuarial perspective to help sustain the bank?
Yeah, remember this was total restructure. The bank, the original business collapsed completely. We were telling you there was no longer business to talk about. But because it was about number 6 or number 7 bank, it had to be bailed out. So classifying between good book and bad book is just to make sure the book that has got better loans continues to run. That business continued to run as African Bank. It was recapitalized and continued to run as African Bank and everything else. The bad book, you're actually putting, because it's non-performing, you now have to put measures in place to see how you can collect and all these things, you know. So that one, we wouldn't even talk about it because it is now just there. It is now in a collection phase, or maybe restructuring or rehabilitation of the loans. We are talking about individuals who had borrowed here. This business was a retail business, lending money to people. So now you are supposed to go and collect. So essentially, the good book continued because that one was good already. But there would have been work done to actually separate. Modeling is actually done to actually assess which ones are the good book, who are paying, and those who are not paying. It's actually an exercise on its own. So it's not just done, you know. So that's what actually happened. So whatever measures, this book was now being run on sound principles to continue moving forward. This bad book is collection, restructuring, fixing whatever needs to be fixed. Probably move some of the accounts to the good book if you manage to fix them, whatever was happening on that book. I hope that answers you. All right, I think with this, we could spend the whole day, but I would like to end here. Professionalism beyond gains. Professionalism is all you know. Beyond gains or above gains. Actuarial Society of Ghana brought that up, and I did not want to take up this topic. I'm glad I did, because when I did my investigations and I started applying my mind, I realized this is loaded. For the next decade, we'll be talking about this as we make Ghana great again. Thank you very much.
Michael, you said make Ghana great again. For a second, I thought we were back in America. MAGA, make America great again. I have a little proposition to make to you, the folks here. It's 12:53. According to the program, we're supposed to have had lunch at 12:45 to 1:30. Yet we've got a presentation by Stella Jonah, which was implementation RBC, or implementation RBC regime in Ghana. The question I'm going to ask you folks is, do we do it now? You want us to do it now? Hallelujah. God bless you. In fact, coming from the vice president, okay, not the current vice, the incoming vice president, it's done. So please, let's welcome Stella Jonah. And she's going to be speaking on implementation RBC regime in Ghana. Do we have the slides ready? Hello? Okay, Stella, you just come and take it up. Wow. Sorry for not being a gentleman. Sorry. I'm sorry. At least the last step, yeah, man. Every day, I mean. Hey, This is an apple. Oh. I don't even know how they open it.
Thank you so much. While we wait for the slides, I'll quickly start. Now there's pressure on me. I'm standing between us and our lunch, so I have to make it snappy. Okay. Looks like we're still loading, so I'll run. So RBC stands for risk-based capital. It's a model of measuring the adequacy of a company's capital and how solvent it is. The presentation should run for about 20, 30 minutes. So hopefully we'll be done in good time. The outline is going to be about 4 or 5 issues. So I'll give a brief introduction. We'll talk about the insurance market in Ghana. And then we'll speak on the current regulatory framework, benefits of a risk-based approach in Ghana. Why should we go risk-based? What are we doing now? Why is it not working? Why do we want to change it? And then we'll look at the objectives and the criteria for implementing RBC in Ghana. And then the process of implementing it itself, great. The process of implementing itself on the content page. Great. So we'll look at the process of implementation and then we'll conclude. So by way of introduction, okay, I'm not trying to be obvious, but it looks like I have to be obvious. Okay, by way of introduction, essentially for a sector to be financially stable and sound, you will need some sort of risk measuring tool to determine capital adequacy and solvency. And focusing on risks that companies are facing within the sector, especially for insurance, makes that sector strong. It enables companies, the management of companies, better manage their companies, and for the regulator, we're able to supervise those companies better. Another thing, another reason for RBC essentially is it increases the focus on risks that companies face. And so, ordinarily, within the framework, an insurance company that is practicing risk-based supervision, and in Ghana, the insurance regime is undergoing the risk-based supervisory framework, RBC sits on top of it as an added requirement. In fact, the two complement each other. They go together. And we started the RBS journey years ago. Unfortunately, we could not take off on RBC earlier on until now. As we progress in the slides, we'll get to know why. And then it provides a better tool, I've mentioned before, for measuring financial soundness, and then enables the company to tailor capital requirements to the underlying risks, because whatever risk you carry as an insurance company, you're able to measure and determine how much capital you should have. Now, with technical assistance from the World Bank, we are working on an RBC regime in Ghana. So how does the insurance market look like today? Where are we? What do we look like? How are we faring? I shared a lot of, after this slide, I'm going to share some tables with you just so you have an idea of how we've performed over the past 5 years. Now, RBC needs to reflect market conditions, even though internationally it's a requirement, and the NIC is part of the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, which is a standard setting body for insurance regulators. We would have to take this concept of RBC and make it relevant to Ghana. And so we're going to situate it within the Ghanaian landscape. And for that matter, there's been a lot of analysis that has gone on in terms of where we are, how we can fit RBC within our framework, even determining the readiness of the industry and how far or at the pace at which we want to go. The economy of Ghana has had significant challenges. We all know we went through DDP not long ago. We went through some banking crisis years ago. Inflation 2022, 2023 was even over 30%. So the economy has had some market challenges, has had some challenges, some ups and downs. And within that, we're trying to situate RBC, and you can imagine how difficult that will be, but it's something that needs to be done. And so there's going to be a lot of consideration that the regulator has in mind. There's going to be a lot of collaboration between the NIC, the GIA, which is the Ghana Insurance Association, the ASG, and we've already formed an industry working group, and we're taking, they're going to start work soon. The ICAG, with the Institute of Chartered Accountants Ghana, is also on that working group, and we're going to map this out together. Now, the insurance market has been growing. If you look at the CAGR over the past 10 years, it's been an average of about 20%. The insurance market has been growing year on year. We'll see the figures. But it still remains small. We'll talk about penetration. You will see that the market still remains small. The number of insurers have remained stable. We haven't had a new insurance company in about 5 or 6 years. The number of life companies and non-life companies have remained stable. There have been a couple of companies that have had to go through some sort of resolution process and have been placed under statutory management. But generally, the market has been stable. We have a wide range of products which are mainly traditional, unit-linked on the life side. And then we're working on upping up inclusive insurance and microinsurance products. Investments are domestic, and insurers are mainly profitable, but the issue of expenses has always been a concern, and currently still is a concern. So if you look at gross premiums, this is for 5 years, 2019 to 2023, you can see that there's been some growth. If you look at the life sector, please let's go, thank you. I don't have a clicker, so I can't show, but probably I can point it. So if you look at the life sector, which is the second column, from 2019 to 2023, you can see it has essentially doubled in growth. You can tell from 1.6 billion to almost 4 billion. The life sector has grown in terms of premiums. Non-life, the same. And at the end of 2023, the total average, the total gross premium return for the industry was on its way to 9 billion Ghana cedis. Now let's compare this to penetration. And you would see some interesting figures. So for penetration, we have, thank you. For penetration, you will see we started 2019. You can see how life was faring, non-life, and then the total. And if you look at even for the total, 5 years ago and now, we have not made much progress. However, on the far side, you will see that worldwide, as of 2022, insurance penetration was about 6.7%. And even on the African front, it was about 2.4%. So there's that question, as in why the disconnect? It's a question we're still trying to answer. There's been some conversation around the issue of the growing basket of the GDP, because we know penetration is a factor of GDP, insurance contribution to GDP. And usually when the basket increases or grows and insurance is not able to catch up, when you run the ratios, you would see that there's not much to be done. Because you can see that the sector is growing, but in terms of penetration, not too good. But another way of measuring a company, an insurance industry's size or relevance is density. And on that front, I didn't share that table, but on that front, you will see that we've made some gains. Even on insurance coverage, we've made some gains. We also look at the assets of the companies within the sector. And this is very interesting for me, because if you look at the life sector, it has a huge amount of assets as compared to the non-life sector. But if you know the history of insurance in Ghana, you will know that the non-life sector had a head start. The life sector was formally born or inaugurated just about 2006, 2007. But already their assets are higher than that of non-life. So that's by way of introduction and sharing with us where we are in terms of the insurance market. Just so we can see how RBC is going to fit in all of this. So apart from the insurance market, let's see what the current regulatory framework says. Does it allow us to do RBC? What do we need to consider if we want to run a risk-based capital regime? So if you look at the legal framework, the Insurance Act has provisions that cater for the implementation of RBC, starting from Section 58 all the way to Section 63, 64. You would see that there are deliberate provisions that have been carved out to allow the Commission to implement risk-based capital. There are provisions on capital adequacy, there are provisions on solvency, there are provisions of making the allowance of basing some index to measure the capital of a company, risk profiling, and all that. And there are even provisions that allow the regulator to request a company, even after going through RBC, if they need to top up or they need to go above and beyond what they have, there are provisions that allow the regulator to direct that company to do so. We also have, on the other side, apart from the mother law, what we call the solvency framework. The current solvency framework is split into two, for the life sector and the non-life sector. And in both cases, even though there is some sort of index-based measurement of capital adequacy and solvency, it doesn't capture the full gamut of risks that an insurance company will have. And so in terms of proper international standards, there's some sort of gap. And that's what we're seeking to do by improving what we have now. There's another tool we have, which is called the financial condition reporting, all within the current regulatory framework. Now, the financial condition reporting is some sort of report the regulator requires companies to prepare. And this is prepared by an appointed actuary. And what he does is to compare the company's risk profile with the assets, capital adequacy, what is exposed to, how is mitigating it, how ready it is in meeting liabilities, and things like that. And for a company, it's very important because it can guide them in making business decisions. It can guide them in knowing where they are, what to do, what to change, what's not working. And it's also important for us at the regulator's office because it gives us a perspective of how the company is faring. Now, the financial condition report is key in the whole system of risk-based capital because an essential element of risk-based capital is for a company to perform what we call an ORSA. Now, an ORSA is an own risk and solvency assessment. And even though we're not quite there yet, the FCR has been built on to develop the ORSA. And so in the meantime, at least we have something we can play around with when it comes to assessing the companies in terms of their financial condition. In 2018, we developed some proposals on RBC. And we had been talking about it for a while, but in 2018, we actually tried to take off. Some technical specifications were prepared, and I'd like to particularly, where is Oko? He stepped out. Okay. When he comes in, I'll make him say hi. So we prepared some technical specifications. We shared with the market about 6 insurers. Yes, he's over there. So Oko was key in developing the technical specifications with another person at the commission, that's Mr. Shen, and we were able to move forward with the 2018 proposals. The companies that were willing did some dry runs and were able to get somewhere. But unfortunately, a couple of things came in and the progress stalled. And by the time we realized we had to implement IFRS 17, we had to mitigate the industry facing DDP. And when we got back on track trying to catch up, we realized that even how RBC was being done internationally had evolved. And so we had to pivot and see what we can do. So now we are full on going on RBC. We've started discussions with the companies and we're ready to go. Now, I just want us to spend some time to go through why a risk-based approach. What's the fuss about? What's the big deal about doing things risk-based? Is it necessary? Is it important? So, first thing we will do is talk about the importance of adequate capital. Now, as we know, capital is important for every company, and I'm going to proceed on the assumption that we all have some basic understanding of what capital is in terms of an insurance company's setup. Now, a company will need that capital. If it's a startup, it will need that capital at least to cross over the first couple of years. The literature will tell you a regular insurance company, once you set up, for the first 3 to 4 years as a shareholder, forget it. You may not even make profit. You may not even break even to make profit. Now, during those times, during the first couple of years, what will tide you over is the capital you have. And so even for us at the commission, when a company submits an application for licensing, and right now, because we're not RBC, there's a nominal amount of 50 million you should have. When we check your projections and we can determine that you actually need more than that 50 million because you will need extra to tide you over, we ask you to put in more. Because as a startup, you would need that. Another thing, or another purpose of adequate capital is for existing companies to scale up. Sometimes they want to diversify. We've been talking about inclusivity and diversity already, and we can tell that inclusivity and diversity is not, from the beginning, it's not a profitable business. It's not a profitable business. So when you have something like capital and you have a good strategy, it can help. Now, another thing capital does is to provide a solvency margin for the company. So at a point in time, for whatever reason, when you have adequate capital, you're able to remain solvent. And this is because of the peculiar nature of insurance. So as an insurance company, you're going around giving promises to people that give me your money. When something happens, I will pay. But guess what? I won't pay you the 5 cedis you give. I'm going to pay you multiples of that. At the end of the day, when that risk crystallizes, what do you have to give to the person? It will have to be the basis of your capital. And so you will find companies, even for reinsurers, they underwrite based on the percentage of the capital they have because that's relevant to the business they do. Capital is also important because it protects the interest of policyholders. Now, when a business is being wound up or is being transferred or is being merged, what comes to bear, the core issue you need to determine is where the company stands in terms of capital. But capital is not the only thing you will need when you're determining the wider solvency regime of a company. It's just an element that is in place to support solvency. There are other elements you have to look at. And if you look at the IAIS standards, what we call the Insurance Core Principles, ICPs, various ICPs will speak, apart from capital adequacy, they'll speak on valuation, they'll speak on reinsurance, which are all forms of risk transfer. They'll speak on enterprise risk management and the like. And all these come together to determine the solvency of a company. And later on, when we get to the criteria for the RBC, you will see that these things come to bear, or we intend to make them come to bear in our RBC framework. So for, great. So now we can spend some time looking at the types of capital requirements. Capital is not static. Capital rides on a continuum of the sensitivity of risks. And so you would not have any key situation where you would have capital being stuck in time. It has to be done in such a way that it can respond to time, it can respond to risks over time. And so there are various ways in which capital can be determined. Some of the simple, well, one of the simple ways is to use the greater of. So usually there will be some index-based factors, and then they'll say the greater of that is what will trigger the need for the amount of capital you need. And then some other jurisdictions have graduated on that, and that's what Ghana we currently do. We've developed that, we've gone a little bit higher above the basic greater of. And so if you look at our current solvency framework, after matching your available capital resource with your solvency capital requirement, you would have to determine between premiums, management expenses, 3 various levels, and the greater of that will determine how much capital you need. Now, why should capital be sensitive to risk? Or why should we match risk to capital? Great, okay. So for the regulator, it's important that the entities you regulate have their capital requirements matching the risk they carry. And this is because every company has different needs and parameters from each other. Every company has different exposures based on the decision of the company, the strategy, how they determine to focus on their risks. They may present their requirements differently. One company is risk averse, one company wants to try everything on the market. And so even within the Act, the regulator is required to consider capital adequacy based on the nature, scale, and complexity of the insurance companies. And this is where RBC comes in. It means that the capital determination of a company or the solvency determination of a company must be based on the risk the company carries. And this is because it will not be fair for someone to manage his risks carefully, do all he has to do, cross his T's and dot his I's, and be asked to keep the same amount of capital as someone that wants to climb every mountain and cross every sea. And so you would have to realize that there should be risk sensitivity when determining capital. And it also enables the regulator in better supervision, even for the management of the company. It enables them better assess their risks and know how to mitigate them when they come up. And so now we're going to speak on the objectives for RBC implementation in Ghana, and then the criteria we have developed. So we have 5 key objectives, and the main one is to provide adequate policyholder security. For the regulator, one of our key mandates is to protect the policyholder interest and to an extent the interest of the general public or public interest. Unfortunately, companies see that differently. That's not their focus all the time. It's their focus for some of the time, but sometimes when they have to take hard decisions, they put some other parameters ahead. And you can't blame them. It's a matter of perspective. Another thing is for effective implementation. So at the commission and even within the industry, you must get to a point where you are effectively implementing regulatory tools, effectively implementing solvency, effectively implementing insurance, the business of insurance, making sure that the risk that the company carries is commensurate to the capital he has, enables the company perform better. Now, it reinforces the risk-based supervision process. I mentioned earlier that we are under the RBS regime, and the RBC reinforces that process because it ties in neatly with the whole concept of risk. And then it shifts management's focus from rules to risk. So for most of the companies, currently, once you are in a rules-based regime, all they do is tick the box. What does the regulator want today? Yesterday, there was a letter the regulator sends. What do they want? What's their deadline? Let's do it, take it, and move on. But when you move into an RBC regime, management becomes more proactive. What can we do to reduce our risk? What can we do to advance our cause? What can we do to remain relevant with the capital we have? How can we be efficient? And so implementing RBC in Ghana would help companies shift management to risk. And then at the end of the day, you would realize that there's a relationship between RBC and insurance sector development. If you look at jurisdictions like South Africa, the UK, Canada, you would realize that going RBC was the best decision to have been taken because focusing on identifying, assessing, and mitigating your risk enables you to, take prudent business decisions. So now for the criteria, there are three main criteria for RBC implementation, and I'll run through this quickly. So the first one is the regulatory ambit. And for that, the criteria is around the nature of the requirements, how to develop and make sure that they are maintained over time, and how they compare with other solvency regimes, other jurisdictions that have walked that road, so we don't reinvent the wheel. And then the next set of criteria is the supervisory, how the requirements can enable and support the work of the Commission in supervising the companies. And even for companies that are part of a group, how it can help us determine their exposure in terms of group-wide supervision. And then from the perspective of the insurance companies, how they are likely to prioritize the criteria that will result in an RBC regime that supports the business they do. So for the regulatory criteria, I'm going to skim through quickly. First of all, the RBC must be legally enforceable, and we have that within the framework of the law. It must be consistent with IFRS. That is what we are setting out in our criteria for RBC. And it's very important for us, especially with the implementation of IFRS 17 this year. And so you would see that portions of the RBC framework that IFRS 17 already speaks to, we would adopt that. And also, it's going to make sure that it measures risks accurately, and it's something that all insurers can implement. We understand that within the market, not all companies are the same. We have the big companies, the small companies, the multinationals, and the local. And so we are mindful of implementing a regime that everyone can follow through and implement. Now, for supervisory criteria, I've already mentioned the fact that it must tie into RBS, which is the risk-based supervision, and it must be practical to monitor, assess, and intervene on the regulator's part. So what do I mean by intervention? The regulator has what we call the ladder of intervention, and this is a criteria we have built within the RBS framework that lets us know what to do when, how to act when a company is at a certain phase. And so when we risk rate a company and the company has a low risk, we know that we can just do routine monitoring. If the company has a medium risk, we know the actions we need to take, escalated monitoring, increased on-site inspections. And when the company is in the red, we know we need to start winding down or probably start the resolution process. Now, implementing RBC helps us do this more effectively. And then it also helps us support the assessment of group-wide capital adequacy, especially for companies that belong to groups. From the perspective of the insurance companies, the RBC implementation in Ghana is going to support strategic planning because it's going to help them determine how much capital they want to invest here or there. What's that risk, what that activity is going to how it's going to pan out for them, what risk they are going to be exposed to in that determination, how they're going to manage that risk. The insurance companies would also like it not to be not too difficult to understand, easy to assimilate, even by local management. We want to develop the RBC regime to be such that it doesn't have to be explained or run through by a fancy actuary, forgive me, but it can be understood by regular people within the company. And then what the insurance companies will also like is for it to be fair, because if someone is managing their risk well, they will not want to be measured on the same level as a company that is not measuring their risk well. So now we're going into the meat of the matter, the main RBC implementation. And this is a tall order, but fear not, will be done very soon. So the first one is the wider solvency regime. To begin with, IFRS 17 will be the basis. IFRS, pardon me, will be the basis. International Financial Reporting Standards will be the basis for valuing the valuation of assets and liabilities. We would omit, I mentioned before, we'll omit guidance on application if IFRS caters for that. We will also deal with issues like investment requirements in a separate document, so the document is not too bulky and too complicated. And further down the line, we would require companies to perform ORSAs. But I mentioned before that we are currently doing the FCRs, and that may serve a purpose for a while. Another key thing with RBC is the importance of disclosures. And so we would require companies to also do a lot of public disclosures, and we'll provide guidance on that. Now for the benchmarks of the design, because we're starting this for the first time, we determined that we're going to use a limited, we're going to benchmark a limited number of jurisdictions. So we're benchmarking 2 jurisdictions, and we're benchmarking, well, 2 standards or 2 parameters. The first one is the ICS, which is the International Capital Standards by the IAIS. And then we are benchmarking Canada's system. Now, why Canada? Why travel all the way to Canada? And this is because the RBS process we have implemented was fashioned or modeled after the Toronto Center model. We received technical assistance from that. And if you look at how that model runs, it fits within the Ghanaian perspective. So we're moving to RBC. As a matter of course, it's simpler to just graduate towards that side. But if you remember, from the beginning, I said we're going to situate that within the Ghanaian context. And so we will tweak where we need to tweak. And in fact, before we started doing that, we're tweaking what we need to tweak to make it sit within the Ghanaian context. And then we're going to consider some other regimes. We have, we're studying the Kenya model, the Rwandan model, and even the South African model. Now, what's the overall structure of the regime? How is it going to run? Now, it's going to be implemented across all insurance companies, insurance and reinsurance companies. Currently, within the solvency framework, we split it into 2 for life and non-life, but this will be one document. And so there'll be one solvency directive, but then where there's divergence, you will see us speaking on life and speaking on non-life, but it will be the one document, not like 2 separate documents we currently have. And then the capital resources are going to be graduated into tiers of quality. So they are going to be stratified into the quality of capital. And then it's going to be calculated on the basis of some risks, which are currently in the RBS process. So something like insurance risk, market risk, credit risk, operational risk will be the main risk categories. And then in line with what we already have, which is the nominal capital, we're going to maintain that some other jurisdictions implementing RBC do not require a nominal amount of capital. But I mentioned earlier, baby steps. So we'll keep the nominal capital, and then we'll build on that with the capital, additional capital requirements. Now, I've mentioned on the scope of application that it's going to be one document, and it's going to be focused on the primary legal entity level. That means that it's going to be focused on just one company. So if it's a company within the industry that is, has related entities, we're not going to consider them together. We're going to consider them individually. But if we need to look at them in a group or holistically, the Act allows us to require them to submit documentation to that effect. Now, when it comes to the capital resources, how is it going to be structured? So I've mentioned it's going to be stratified in terms of quality, and there'll be limitations on the available capital resources. And we're going to determine whether that's going to be of lower quality or higher quality. And calculating those capital resources is going to be modeled after the ICS, ICS of the International Association of Insurance Supervisors. Within our current framework, we have various measurements or various parameters where when it comes to assets, we discount them, and then when it comes to liabilities, we add margins to them. Under the RBC, it will not involve that. We're taking that out of that entirely. So when it comes to the capital requirements, this is how it's going to be. All I've spoken about this, the graphical representation. So you will see the yellow box is the proposed capital requirement, and then the risk categories I spoke about: insurance, credit market operational, and then there's going to be a diversification adjustment. Then where there's a divergence between life and non-life, you will see the various determinations of mortality, longevity, and then for non-life premiums, claims reserve, and the like. So when it comes to insurance risk, essentially what does it mean? So that's one of the sub-risks we're going to use to measure how to determine your capital adequacy. And we're going to use the stress-based approach. And for the non-life, we're going to use the factor-based approach. So there are going to be various factors that will be determined. And for most other RBC regimes, for non-life business, they use a factor-based approach. There are some parameters within the criteria and the implementation we are leaving for the working group to determine. The ICAG is on that working group I mentioned earlier. ASG is on that working group. The GIA is on that working group. And doing things like that does not make it look as if we're imposing on them. We're ready to receive feedback and recommendations for them. So to a large extent, this is mainly high level, and the working group is going to fine-tune the details. Now for market risk, there are going to be 5 main sub-risks: interest, forex, equity, real estate, and any other market risk exposure we determine relevant. Now for the determination of market risk, is going to be a factor-based approach. For credit risk, it's going to be calculated using also 5 main risk subcategories. We have the public sector entities, corporates, mortgages, and then a couple of others that would be used to determine. That will also be a factor-based approach. And then when it comes to operational risk, we're going to use a factor-based approach, which is the same that is used under the ICS. Now, when it comes to aggregation and diversification under the capital requirements, the regime is going to require that there's an explicit recognition of the effects of diversifying your risk using some sort of correlation matrix. And so at the end of the day, you would realize that for a company to determine how much capital they need, we're going to consider diversification of those risks, and at a point in time, how they aggregate. So where there are lower levels of those diversification of risk, you realize that there will be a determination of how the capital requirements are going to be developed. And we are doing this because we don't want there to be an excessive complication of matters. Now, minimum capital and contingency reserve. So I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a minimum nominal amount, and they would be in place. They are currently in place, will continue under the RBC regime. And then there's another portion within the current framework which requires contingency reserve, and that will also be continued. Now there will be control levels, and they will be established for the capital adequacy ratio. Currently, the capital adequacy ratio of the companies is 150% or 1.5 times. I mean, your assets will be 1.5 times your liabilities. Now, the PCR, which is the prescribed capital requirements, we will need that, and what we're doing is that we're hoping to establish a confidence level of 99.5% that an insurance company will remain solvent over a 12-month horizon. Now, transitional arrangements. So the MCR under the new regime, when we roll it out, most likely will be different for most of the insurance companies, if not all. When we roll it out, we start doing the dry runs, it's likely for us to see that most companies will require more capital or higher minimum capital than they currently have. So after we do the dry runs, we're going to determine the transition period for which the companies would need to be fully RBC, because we have to bring everybody along, and we'll be able to determine that only after the impact of the dry runs have been determined. So in conclusion, we have come far as an industry, the regulator has been putting in ways to make sure that the companies are financially sound, the insurance sector is sustainable, is within our mandate as a regulator. And so in determining that we want to move forward with the RBC regime, we quite understand that there are various countries that have already started the journey, and so we're relying on inputs and sharing, receiving learnings and insights from them. By way of next steps, by January 2025, that's in a couple of months, we hope to develop the RBC directive. We're actively working on it, and we'll consult stakeholders on that draft document in February 2025 to receive feedback, and then we'll test the RBC directive with some selected insurers. Volunteers are welcome, but by the first quarter 2025, we should be testing, and then we will consider the results, see what we need to change, determine the transitional period, and then latest by September 2025, we should be finalizing, and implementation will be in January 2026. So in a matter of how many minutes, I hope I've been able to share with you how we intend to implement RBC in Ghana, and I thank you for your attention. I'd like to quickly say I have a couple of colleagues with me from the Commission. I have Augustine, I have Rashid, I have Nicholas here with me at the Commission. They're doing really good work on building the RBC framework. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Oh, very good. You don't run away like that. Where's the other mic? Where are the mics? I've seen a hand here and a hand by a gentleman here. But let me walk down to you so that you can ask the question. Quickly, just 2 questions or something like that, no more, and then you can go for your lunch. I'm supposed to be fasting.
Okay, I'm Nap. I'm Nap. From SIC Life. Okay, so if you look at the financial sector, like the banks, from time to time they increase their capital adequacy or their capital requirements. They increase their capital requirements. Then from time to time too, you realize that the insurance sector too also increase capital requirement. Now, if you look at the banking sector, especially loans, they always consider the non-performing loans. And then the banks will adjust it before they can maybe determine how much is the lending rate. Now, you look at that and then you consider, let's say, insurance company doing bank assurance with banks. Now, with this arrangement, you realize that most of the banks will want to take commission. And then the regulator says, no, since you are not registered as a corporate institution, you cannot take commission. Then they rely on maybe management expenses. And now with these management expenses, you realize that these banks do not pay claims, and yet they can take as much as 40%. Now, this in a way affects performances of insurance company. Now, insurance companies, if you look at our performances, especially with respect to underwriting losses, we are making negatives. Now, these insurance companies don't factor these negatives that we are maybe making, which could have been compared to the non-performing loans that they are making to do our pricing. You understand it? And we are not doing well, and yet we are sharing these premiums with them. The regulator maybe is not coming out strictly to say, no, it shouldn't be this way because you don't pay claims. You factor all this risk in your decision. We don't factor. And in your presentation, you were saying some companies go climbing mountains, others even climbing, crossing seas. And because of undercutting, we do all these things. So what is the regulator doing to mitigate all these things? So that at the end of it all, if we increase our capital adequacy ratio or capital requirement, we don't end up eroding it by way of claims. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Please, you want to take it or you want the second one?
It was a long one, so let me take it.
Okay.
That's if we're fine. So,
You want to ask a question?
frankly, you asked the question and I think you've answered it.
Very typical Ghanaian.
To begin with, you spoke about banks not being entitled to commission. Now, within the bank assurance framework, the bank is an agent. The insurance company is its principal. If it provides a service, it's entitled to commission. So, for that, under the bank assurance relationship, banks are entitled to receiving commission. Now, I'm sure your concern is the excessive rate of commission they receive. And actually, it baffles me as much as it baffles you. It's a relationship between a principal and an agent. The principal is an insurance company. You have set out an agreement. The regulator has provided a guide within which you need to operate. If the company is paying 40% of its premiums to one agent, mind you, if it's paying 40 to one agent, it doesn't mean 60 is going into the kitty. There are other agents they need to pay. And like you rightly said, the bank doesn't carry that risk. It doesn't pay any portion of the claim. But as an insurance company, you continue to do that. Even after the regulator has set out requirements and has a sanctions and penalties regime. I think the answer lies in RBC. At the end of the day, when we determine your risks, you would even see it before it comes to us. When you determine your risks and you're able to tell where you stand, you will know how much capital you would have to put in. And if as an insurance company running, if as management running business year on year, you're not making profit and yet you need to go back to the shareholder asking for the injection of capital because you're paying all your monies to one agent when you should have had enough to put in the kitty to invest, to turn around and pay claims. I think RBC would separate those issues neatly for us. So let's see how it goes. Because honestly, the issue of bank assurance is one that the companies need to take head on. It's a decision to take a bank as an agent. And after you sign that agreement, once you're the principal, you should be able to determine how much to pay your agent. We've provided the framework. RBC will solve that.
Okay. There's a lady here.
Yeah, please, my name is Yvette from SNET. So I wanted to find out, under the supervisory criteria for the RBC implementation, you mentioned that for about 5 years now, we haven't seen new insurance companies spring up. I stand to be corrected. So I'm wondering, so when you supervise those who have managed their risks properly, you mentioned that they will have routine supervision. Then we go to the medium end ones. So I'm asking, have you put in place interventions where previously, if you were under the well-managed risk bracket and you have moved to medium, have you put in place maybe interventions where you'll be managed so that you either stay within the medium or you are more or less guided to go back to your well-managed risk so that you don't fall in the red brackets where you'll be asked to fold up and all that? If you haven't, then I suggest you do so. Thank you.
Okay, so we have. But before I go on, I'd like to ask, were you in Go last week? I remember that hair.
And I remember that face. We had a good time.
Have you seen, just before the next question, have you seen, no disrespect, please, what the ladies talk about? I remember that hair. The irony of it is that she beautifully left Stella off the hook. What do I mean by beautifully left Stella off the hook? She did it the Ghanaian way. She gave the answer and then asked the question. Just like you said about our. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you. Francis.
So just before, I just wanted to elaborate a bit. So we have, and within that framework, unfortunately, it wasn't within this topic, so I would have shared it. So there are various levels and there are various actions, both preventive and corrective, to bring the companies back to where they were. And within the framework we have persons we call relationship managers that cater to these companies, and so are continuously doing both on-site and off-site monitoring to see where they stand. And there are red flag triggers within that framework, and there's a whole structure around it, so we have it.
All right, thank you. I'm Francis from University of Energy and Natural Resources. So me coming from the academic background, I was expecting to see some mathematics. Yes.
Sanepa.
On the RBC. Taking into consideration the heterogeneity of insurers or policyholders, how do we factor in those heterogeneity of those policyholders into RBC?
Thank you.
Okay. So with the issue of mathematics, if you invite me next year, or if you invite the NIC next year, we'll share the math. Honestly speaking, I mentioned previously that this is very high level. Now, to get the participation or the involvement of the industry, we're opening up the discussions for them to make input. We're crunching the numbers now. Augustine, Nicholas, Rashida here, they'll share with you. What we've done at this particular stage is to share the policy, determine the criteria and the objectives. The actual determinations, the quantitatives are still being developed. And so if you invite us next year, we'll share that.
There's a gentleman here.
So I'm always from my life. The question is, do you plan to give assumptions for the FCR? Then there are also who have our own assumptions, in-house assumptions, because I wonder how. If another thing is, if 40% of commission is eaten into premium, so we are not able to pay claims, you should have seen that first, because then liabilities will be up and capital, you actually cannot make capital. So these are.
So for the FCR, even for the current FCR, we have a template for guidance. When we graduate to OSA, we will have a template for guidance just for standardization and for easy implementation. Not every company can determine or develop their own OSAs. For other jurisdictions, it's open. But usually for us, we try to help. Even with IFRS 17, you know the journey. We've developed templates and guidance for everybody so that those who need it can follow on it. So when we get to the OSA, we'll do that. Now, on the issue of determining capital adequacy, the reason I said you will see it before it gets to us is because you will populate the template before it gets to us. But so at that point where you hit send and it gets into the portal for us to analyze, you'd be aware when we're calling what we're telling you to do. So at that point, you should have an answer, or you should have a plan on getting out of the rut. Within the Insurance Act, you have the opportunity of developing a recovery plan under, I think, Section 178 or 167, to determine how you intend to get out of the rut. And honestly speaking, if you look at where companies are now, those that are not performing too well, it's got to do with either corporate governance or operational decisions. Those two. The classic example is the bank assurance. And so at the end of the day, developing something like an RBC model, having you in my life, and I might say my life is one of the prudence companies, having you in your capacity as an actuary will be able to provide good guidance to companies on the best way to manage their capital and stay profitable.
Another question from I know your head.
Sorry, hello. Okay, I'm just a bit curious about worried about insurance penetration, because with the rollout of the RBC, you rightly mentioned that it's most likely that the capital requirements may increase for the insurance companies. So with the slow insurance penetration and then the likelihood of having the capital requirements increase, wouldn't that be a bit of a stress on the insurance companies? Because products are very much homogeneous. If you look at most of the life products, they are almost the same. It's just that they are tweaked here and there. So if we don't have new products to say, we don't have new insurance companies springing up, insurance penetration remains literally same. And then capital requirements will be increased. I think it should be looked into so that it will be practical and feasible.
Okay. So on the issue of insurance penetration, I think we should give it a bit of perspective. It's a parameter for measuring the development of insurance within a country, but there are other parameters. And so I mentioned measuring the density of insurance, things like insurance coverage. And on that front, we are very well ahead. When it comes to insurance coverage, we're about 44%, if my memory serves me right. And comparing us to some jurisdictions within the African continent, we're not too bad at all. So penetration is not the only measurable factor, although it is key. But on the one side, looking at penetration, you would also have to look at, is the market growing? And we could see that it is. Year on year, there is some growth within the market in terms of premiums, in terms of assets. You will see that growth. And so it's not like the market is stunted. I agree with you when you say products are mainly homogeneous. And so even on the front of the commission, through innovation, we have some provisions in the Act. Companies are coming up with innovative ideas, developing new products. Some of them are offshoots of the traditional. I mean, you can't deny it. But some are really thinking out of the box. We have the regulatory sandbox, which is going to provide an avenue for companies to innovate, come up with entirely new products. And we're also working on developing inclusive insurance within the space and micro insurance. And all those things will help open up the options a policyholder has and possibly grow the market. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, then following up on what you said, if then we are going to have innovation, so either modification of already existing products or entirely new products being introduced. So then that will be risk, increased risk, if I should take it that way. So still, I'll come back to the capital requirements, because if I'm going to take up new products, definitely not too certain about its performance, because in Ghana, many factors depend or determine how insurance is purchased. More often than not, we buy insurance with our disposable income. It's not the premier thing. So I still believe that we should look at the capital requirements if we are going to encourage insurance companies, especially those springing up. Because the last CIG Awards, I met one lady, and she was saying that, hey, no, we can't be part of the people who will be mentioned because we are now trying, and we can't stand with the giants. So I think for innovation, for the sake of innovation and for the sake of managing risk adequately, we still should have some strain on the capital requirements so that people can come all out. That's my suggestion.
Thank you for the comment. But I believe that is why risk-based capital will solve it, because based on the risks you're exposed to, if you want to go through the innovation drive full throttle, you would have to do with cyber risk insurance, you have to deal with a whole lot of other issues, data protection issues and all that. So going RBC will enable you to determine how much risk you want to be exposed to, how you're going to mitigate it, and then you yourself determine the capital you're going to use to match that risk. So I agree with you. Innovation brings on its whole length, its own type of risk, but going RBC is going to help the company determine their own risk appetite and also determine how much capital they want to put on the line. And I think at that point, we're placing the ball in the court of the companies for them to decide what they want to do.
You know what? This is a little advice to new management team that is coming in, so that next year when you are doing this, we will have Yvette Anderson and Stella Ando having it varies it, having a discussion, as it were, rather than a lecture right here, because I like the way it's been going between the two of them. Absolutely fantastic. Mr. Intim, President, is Owukampumo, Martin. Stella, once again, thank you very much for your presentation on RBC. So I guess that's it for the moment. As they say, and I'm going to say it with my English accent, folks, lunch is served. You can please go. We'll be right back. 45 minutes. 45. Thank you very much.